Biggie Small Jaws here, and today we're talking about spooling line on a baitcaster and how to avoid what you see here, which is uneven line on the spool. Like I said, the topic of today's video is spooling up a baitcaster to avoid problems. Let's just jump right into this. We'll make this one quick. First off, a list of stuff that I use in order to do the job right. Not essential, but it just allows me to do it by myself efficiently and just get it done. First off, the baitcaster that you want to spool up. This is a completed reel. It's a Curado DC that I did a while back because we have a ton of ice in Utah and there's no bass fishing to be done. So I just sit and play with my gear. Next up is a spool of mono. This is 10-pound Berkley Trilene Big Game. It's a 1,500 yard spool, so it'll last a long time. I've spooled up a ton of reels with this. And yeah, this is what I use for my mono backing behind my braid. That allows me to eat up some of that line capacity of the spool. And that does two things for me. It allows me to save some money on braid. You know, my goal is to shoot for that 75 yards, just split that braid spool in half. So I can get 2 reels out of it. So I'm shooting for 75 yards of braid on my reel. And second, by eating up that line capacity, you're actually expanding the diameter of that braid on the spool, if that makes sense. You're filling up the really tight part of the spool, you know, that really tight circle with mono, and filling it up, getting it bigger and bigger. And then your braid's going to sit on that mono. That really helps casting, in my opinion. It lets that braid just jump off the spool. And yeah, it just works well. Next up, these cool little spooling stations. I think I got this one online. They're pretty cheap. They're not really that special, but they're great little tools. It's got a little suction cup, allows you to mount it in a ton of places. And then it has these 2 little tension systems. It's just a cone-shaped piece of metal here that sits down in the spool, a spring, and then like a lock washer set up. It's just a little washer with a wing nut that tightens up against the spool shaft. And what that allows me to do is control the tension on this. And through a system of, you know, removing the spring on one side or both sides, I can get it really tight. But the big thing I want to bring up is I use this more as a line management tool, not my tension tool for spooling braid, because tension is so important when spooling braid on a baitcaster to make it lay nice and flat and to avoid problems like dig-ins and stuff when you're out there setting the hook or things like that. So yeah, spooling station is great. And then the weight system that I use is just a little jerry-rigged neoprene reel pouch. I think it cost me like $4 at the local tackle shop. And I just happen to have a spool of lead sitting around from my steelhead fishing that I do. So I just drop that in there. And what that pouch allows me to do is hang it, you know, hang that weight on my line as I'm spooling my reel. And what that does is simulate like a loaded rod. It's a ton of weight, puts a ton of tension on that line, so you're reeling against resistance. And it just helps that braid lay nice and smooth and helps it go all the way from one edge of the spool to the other on your reel. And the last thing I do is I make sure I run my line down the guides of an empty rod and mount my reel to a rod when I'm spooling up. And what that does is allows that line to track perfectly, to lay perfectly coming into that line guide of your reel. And yeah, that's the setup I use to do it. So let's just jump right into how I like to spool a baitcaster. I apologize for how shaky this video is. I don't really have a good way of doing this really stable. But anyways, like I said, I'm going to show you kind of the speed that I want to reel at. And it's a nice, slow, steady reel. And what I'm watching for is making sure that line, spooling on that, is going all the way to the edge of the spool on both sides. Like that. And nice and slow. But steady. Steady's key. You don't want that line jumping around on that spool. And just nice and constant. Now what I'm going to shoot for, guys, is you can see that bevel, that light bouncing off that bevel on that spool. With braid, I'm going to fill it all the way to the edge of that, maybe even more, just to get a little bit of extra casting distance. That line will really want to jump off the spool. But yeah, you want to bring it right up to that bevel. It's not like a spinning reel. So that's going to be full. And yeah, I'm just going to save you guys the pain of watching me spool this and show you what the finished spool looks like. So finished spooling that up. It didn't take me too long. It's only like 120 yard capacity on the Chronoc MGL. But yeah, brought that line almost all the way up to the bevels. I was just using the tail end of a spool. So it was the second reel out of this spool, and it wasn't quite perfect on my proportions, but got it close. And yeah, just some last thoughts on it, some couple more tips. I didn't really show how I put that mono backing on. It's just a standard arbor knot. Plenty of videos out there on spool knots, things like that. Just make sure you always run. I like to take the spools out of my reel, but always run your line down through the line guide and then out the side of the spool. If your spool's out of your reel, tie it on. That way when you slide the spool back in, it lines up, it's through the line guide, and you can run that line down the rod, and then you're good to go. Second thing I didn't cover was the knot I use to attach my mono to my braid. I just do a 5-turn double uni. I'm not relying on that knot for strength. You're not ever going to catch a bass in your entire lifetime that spools you. I mean, maybe some guys that fish river smallmouth, but I've never encountered a situation. I mean, I've caught 36-inch plus steelhead that won't even pull me into my backing. And that's on a pretty good running river. So, like I said, double uni knot. I just do, 5 wraps of braid, 5 twists of mono, pull it tight, and that's my line to line. So I love braid fluoro connections. And I've messed with a bunch of knots, FG knots, dot knots, uni, you name it. Crazy Albertos, blood knots. I mean, there's a 5 million different knots out there that you can use. But again, guys at Tactical Bassin have never let me down, and they run a blood knot, and it is slick. It's basically like a double tapered knot. So it's like a dot knot, but better. And yeah, that's what I'm going to run this year. I experimented with a little bit at the end of last season, and the 1 or 2 times I found enough open water just to go like test some reels out and see, how to set the braking systems and see how the spooling on my job of spooling braid on them did and stuff like that. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. Tension on baitcasters with braid. Even with fluorocarbon and mono, it's just going to help it lay really smooth. So don't be afraid to put a lot of tension on it when you spool up. And yeah, hopefully that helps, guys. And as always, stay fishy, my friends.